bought in, engaged, proactive, critical thinking A players. This is the dream team that all of us, I think, dream of running. Those people, to your point, don't want to show up and be SOP robots every single day. If that's the workplace environment you've created, you are not a competitive offer for an A player who is seeking more than that. And so the first thing to make sure of is that, again, your culture, your ecosystem, your hiring funnel, your team is creating an environment where an A player wants to be.
Welcome everyone to another podcast session, our good old video podcasting here at High Level called High Level Spotlights. And I want to welcome a special guest today, Jhana Li. And I know about her from so many different top players in the industry as kind of the behind the scenes gal that runs a lot of operations, former COO of a seven-figure agency, by the way, while van lifting her way through the North and South America, later COO and head of operations of a coaching operation at the agency lab, coaching hundreds and hundreds of students. I know about that because I was part of some of those programs myself. So Jonna, welcome into our session. Tell us, tell us a little bit about your story before we get diving into some of the cool things we want to talk about today.
Yeah, absolutely. So that keyword there, van lifing, I was in a van living through for about 2.5 years. And my boyfriend at the time was scaling a digital marketing agency. And I was just watching him build this thing every single day across the table. And as you do, you weigh in, you answer questions, you bounce around ideas. And it became really clear to me that the things that were so obvious to me and that I was seeing about his business was just not on his radar. It was a totally different way than he was looking at his business. And through a series of odd events, I stepped into his team for what was supposed to be like a 30-day, just fill in the blank stint, and eventually became that agency's COO. Because when I got in there, oh my God, like there were just neon signs everywhere to me saying, this is where this company could be better. This is where it's inefficient. This is where we're losing money and losing time. And so I didn't know what the heck I was doing, but I just started fixing things. And that really set me down the path of operations. And through a couple of amazing mentors, Layla Hermosi, Adam Rundled, some incredible people, and then a lot of learning and a lot of having an idea, trying it in a business, seeing what happened and seeing how the business responded. Eventually I got pretty good at this operations thing. And the coaching opportunity was huge because I got behind the scenes access to hundreds of agencies and hundreds of digital startups. And I really got to see what makes it work. This whole scalability thing, like what actually goes into that and what are the common pitfalls that stall entrepreneurs out on their path towards 7 and 8 figures. And so that's what we now do. We help entrepreneurs scale their businesses while also scaling themselves out of the day-to-day weeds. And we do that through world-class operations consulting and coaching.
Absolutely. And I love that. And here's what I know as formal visionary of an agency. I've built 3 agencies in the past and, went through a lot of the pains of what it takes to scale. And if you're watching this podcast, I promise you, even if you're not an agency owner, you're going to get a lot of golden nuggets
100%.
out of this because the landscape of business is very similar. And in the agency world, we talk about the visionary versus the integrator or the operator. And in my mind, I always felt the need to have the right integrator or that person behind the scenes, almost like the supply chain management in some sense, to make sure the SOPs are being done right, systems are being built, the right teams are built. And there's a lot of like misnomers and terrible, perceptions about SOPs. So I know, Jonna, you and I talked about, okay, what are we going to talk about when it comes to this podcast? And we kind of came up with a great sense of conversation that we kind of want to unpack, which is the hidden truths of SOPs that are handcuffing massive businesses, especially a world-class agency. And Jonna, can you speak a little bit to what you see in an agency and some of the things that, people they have a lot of misunderstandings about processes in general?
They do indeed. So as we dive into this topic, I think it's important to start with my definition of operations, because that's an important precursor to why I think most people do it wrong.
Absolutely. Yeah.
Operations, by my definition, is any action required within a business to optimize a company's ROI on its core resources. For digital startups, those resources are time, energy, money, and human potential. These are the 4 resources that we as founders have to put to work in our business every day. And the job of operations is to make sure we are getting the most out of each of those resources individually. So where this becomes relevant on the topic of systems and SOPs and process and workflow and all the sexy things is that I see most people have this vision of this like business on autopilot. When we think about a business on autopilot, they picture like a machine, right? Like every workflow, every process, every SOP is like perfectly documented. It all works perfectly well together. And it is just, and your human beings are essentially cogs in those machines, just making sure that the processes and the workflows run, right? And that's the dream. I've seen agencies like that, Paulson, actually do just fine, right? They had all the perfect documentation. The business owner stepped out and stepped away. And 2 years later, that agency absolutely collapsed and bankrupted the agency owner. Why? Because nobody in a machine is thinking. And so the 4th resource, human potential, in my mind, is the most underutilized resource of the 4. And if you're going to roll out a system and you're going to build an SOP, freaking do it. Like I'm ops. I love systems. I love SOPs. But there is a way of doing it that doesn't undercut and undermine your human potential. Because if you are so processed out to the point that your people are essentially just robots, what you have lost is all of the potential value that comes from innovation, creativity, trial and error, proactive action, buy-in, engagement. You don't get the best of people. You just get the good enough. And if your desire as an agency owner is to be, or a business owner, is to be able to run a world-class team, to be able to elevate yourself out of the weeds while the business continues to thrive, not just survive, but thrive and get better without you, or you just want to build the best business possible, you need a team of humans, not robots. Does that make
Absolutely.
sense?
So for us to connect the dots together, maybe
Yeah.
the 3 key discussion points around this idea of SOPs could be maybe marrying the world-class systems with the world teams, right? Like
Yep.
how do we make that happen?
Yep.
Second, maybe could be like building the systems and things that the teams will actually adopt and they would
Yep.
actually love,
Yep.
right? And maybe third thing is how to really create a solution around it and maximizing innovation and creativity. Because at the end of the day, nobody wants to come in and look at some SOPs to do the same mundane thing,
Right.
right? Because they need the human nature to come out from them. So can you help us understand first how to marry the world-class systems with the world-class teams?
Yes. Okay. Beautiful. So, world-class team, right? A players. These are driven, bought in, engaged, proactive, critical thinking A players. This is the dream team that all of us, I think, dream of running. Those people, to your point, don't want to show up and be SOP robots every single day. If that's the workplace environment you've created, you are not a competitive offer for an A player who is seeking more than that. And so the first thing to make sure of is that, again, your culture, your ecosystem, your hiring funnel, your team is creating an environment where an A player wants to be. Like, are you good enough for them? Not just are they good enough for you? And so getting a world-class team is the first item in all of this. That's a little bit beyond the scope of what we talked about doing today. But at the root of it is, do you earn and do you deserve to work with A players? Or do you have an environment where B and C player talent is accepted, invited, and does a just fine job, right? So first off, do we even have a world-class and A player environment? And do we have a hiring funnel where we can find those people? And then once they get in the door, how do we introduce them to our systems so that they actually use them? Because this is the other really hard part of operations is I can build this gorgeous, let's say like sales CRM, but then if my sales team doesn't use it, that is a useless waste of my time and energy. Like I just wasted company resources to build a system that nobody uses, right? And so how we roll out these systems is the key. And this is really where I get into like the nuances of my beliefs around SOPs. So let's take SOPs as an example. Cool. You're an A player, Paulson, you're coming into my team, and I'm giving you this library of SOPs that are relevant and supportive of your role. I'm going to roll that out by saying, so Paulson, here's our client onboarding SOP. This is the best guess that we have right now. This is our best attempt at onboarding our clients in the way that offers them highest success working with us. And as our new account manager or client onboarding specialist, let's say, this SOP is now yours.
Yeah.
Make it better. Same SOP. They're still going to follow the same set of steps, but there's two very important things that I did. First one is that I transferred ownership. This is not my SOP. If somebody's going to update this SOP, it's not freaking going to be me. It's going to be you. This is yours. This is your tool for your job. And why that is so important is because what people own, they take pride in. What people own, they use. What people own, they keep up to date. And I see huge problems in startups where you have this SOP library sitting in like a Monday.com dashboard somewhere that hasn't been updated in 6 months. It's somebody's full-time job to try and chase people down and convince them to update their SOPs. And nobody's using it because the whole thing's out of date, right? Why? Because nobody owns their SOPs. They treat it as, well, that's ops. That's not my job. That's operations. They can build my SOPs. No, no, no.
Yeah.
Your SOP, your job, your problem, you update it.
You're absolutely right on the dot, because we here at High Level, we're right under about 800 people now.
Wow.
And in the beginning stages, the idea was, okay, cool. We got to build systems out, processes out. Everything's like everybody knew that we had to build these things out. But interestingly, when we gave the freedom to the experts in each one of those spaces,
Yes.
even if they had different creative ways to building SOPs, like some people did ClickUp, some people used Excel sheet, they had like different ways to do things. And it was all fine and dandy, even if it's on a sticky note. It didn't really matter. The idea was to give them the freedom to run that canoe or the boat that's attached to the big cruise ship, right? So like that freedom for that entrepreneur that you're talking about that needs that liberation, it's like, I mean, we've all experienced that internally. So you're right on the dot. Now, help me understand how we could get team members to adopt these things, right? Like, because it's one thing to have it. You said, you know, sitting in an archive library, it's fancy and dandy label, real cool and nice with stickers, but like nobody's opened it for ages, you know? Help us understand how that adoption process work. I speak a little bit to change management as well, because that's part of it. So help us understand.
Yeah. And so for those listening and they're like, what's change management? Change management is essentially just creating behavioral change within an organization, right? And it is the more important half of the job, in my opinion, when it comes to operations, because again, it's all well and good to know what the system should look like and to be able to build it. But if people don't use it, it's useless. You just wasted time on an energy on a system that's not getting used. And so the rollout is everything. And again, right, it all comes down to these really subtle positionings and framings around how do you get your team to want to use your system more than you want them to use your system? How do you tap into what matters to them so that they see it as being in their own best interest to use the system the way that it needs to be used? And so what I often see people do when trying to do systems rollout is they will create external motivators, as in, I will fire you if you don't use this system, or I will dock your pay, or I will give you a bonus, or I will check on you every single day in Slack and yell at you until you use the system. All of this is extrinsic. It is external to them. And if we compare extrinsic versus intrinsic motivation is the only thing that actually successfully changes behavior. So how do we get somebody intrinsically motivated? How do they want to use this system? Well, they want to be good at their jobs. They want to grow and excel in their role and in the business. They want to be a part of the team and feel like a team player and feel like they're contributing to their team. And so if I'm rolling out a system, I'm doing it through the lens of, here is how this tool will help you become better at your role. Here's how it's going to make you more efficient. Here's how it's going to take all those stupid follow-up stuff that you hate doing and just take it off your plate so that you no longer have to. The system will handle it. Here is how you can be your best by utilizing this system. Right.
Yeah. And really the cool thing about this is you can create a lot of accountability with these team
Huge.
members when
Yes.
you're giving them the freedom of how these
Yes.
systems are built out. And
Yes.
that's just like, I don't know, it's like a side effect of the culture because they're
Mhm.
like, it's not about the number of items on the SOPs, but it's about the goals that the SOPs achieve. And, obviously people talk about KPIs and
Yeah.
OKRs and
Yeah.
all
Yeah.
those things. But in reality, it comes back to the intrinsic motivation of that
Yeah.
person,
Yeah.
right? Help
It's like
us.
it's a handy side effect that also happens to be like the most important thing when you scale your team, right? Because what happens when your team gets big enough that all of a sudden you can't keep an eye on everyone, right? You don't actually know whether people are doing the right things. You don't actually know whether they're following the SOPs. You don't actually know if they're working 8 hours a day or if they have a side hustle. You don't know these things in a remote environment. And so faced with that challenge, you can like do the bad and do like a screenshot monitor and just totally tank all of your human potential in the entire world. Or you can have already built into the cultural fabric these core values of ownership, responsibility, accountability. And again, what people own, they take pride in, they maintain. And so if you're creating that transfer of ownership from the very beginning, and then secondarily, like going back to even that SOP rollout, letting them know that it is always improving, right? Again, this SOP is our best guess of how this should be done. In that, I'm implying that it can and should get better. That's all an A player wants. An A player wants to grow. They want to innovate. They want to try things. And you are giving them permission. In fact, you're giving them the responsibility to always be pushing forward in their role. And so you still get all the benefits of systems and SOPs, but you do it in a way that unlocks creativity, innovation, proactivity, and buy-in.
Yeah, and to add to your point, I don't even think there's a choice if you're growing
Right?
as a company because like to go from like 0 to 10,000 a month versus 10 to $100,000 a month, those are two different beasts of a
Different
business
worlds.
altogether. So like the SOPs that got you here that's so dear and mighty to you, you're
Yeah.
gonna just throw that out of the window as soon as you hit those quarters and numbers, you're like, oh crap, I'm building this whole thing. Yeah. So like a lot of
So it's different now.
entrepreneurs yeah, a lot of entrepreneurs start off, essentially kind of, they just find their SOPs very holy almost to the
Yeah.
point they worship it. And when they get to that point of business growth, they're like, crap, everybody else needs to follow my lead. And in
Yeah.
reality, you're not removing the entrepreneur from the business. You're actually trying to force everybody else to become another entrepreneur in the business. Can you
Yeah.
speak to that change management, dialogue that you probably see quite often with these businesses?
Yeah, totally. Like it's the difference between, okay, if I've built every SOP, then essentially what I'm saying is my way is the right way. And I'm your boss. So if I give you an SOP and I tell you this is the right way to do it, and it's day one, you want to do great at your job. You don't want to piss off your boss. So, okay, this is the right way to do it. And you tunnel vision your people from day one, because now why would they ever question that? Right. And if my way is the right way, what that essentially means is that the business is going to stop growing when it reaches the limit of how smart I am. Because if I'm the only person coming up with new ideas, if an SOP is going to change, I have to change it. You are mathematically becoming the limiting factor in your company. And I don't think any of us are arrogant enough to say that we are actually the smartest person in the world and that we do know the right way to do everything. But it's hard, Paulson, because when you're small, it really does come back to you, right? Like there's just nobody else. And so we have to figure out the best way that we can figure out to do something. And so it becomes, and then that's what makes us successful. So we train ourselves in the data that says, well, if I take a stab at something, I do a pretty good job with it, it gets done, I find success, I keep going. And that's a hard mental pathway to break when your success comes down to no longer just you and what you can do and what ideas you can have. And your success as a leader and entrepreneur evolves to what can you get a team to do? What can your ecosystem do? What amazing ideas can your team come up with? How hard can they work? How much can they innovate? Because that's the deal breaker between an 100K per month and $1 million per month business.
Absolutely. And I think one of the things that you probably see quite often is people overbuild in the phases that they're in, not
Totally.
knowing what the next chapter is. And
Yeah.
I've been through a few chapters to know that now, right?
Yeah.
And most people don't get to those chapters because they're in certain industries or they have certain offers that's kind of handcuffing them,
Sure.
or maybe they lack certain things like good recruiting skills or leadership
Yeah.
skills or whatever.
Yeah.
Uh, can you speak a little bit to the solutions to how to really look at SOP? So maybe we can start with like, well, what about high level? I know we're on a high level podcast, but like
Sure.
help us understand how you build in things like maybe ClickUp or high level or
Mm.
tools in a sense to achieve the goals you have for ops.
Yeah. Great question. So I love what you kind of slipped it in there, and I want to pull it back out, which is like, back in the early days, we had SOPs written on like
Sticky notes.
sticky notes, right? But I think it captures, like, I don't know if I would fully agree, but I think it captures an essential truth, which is that at every stage of growth, you should always be focused on the minimum viable, right? What is the minimum viable version of this SOP that is going to be functional, it's going to do its job, and it's going to get us to the next level? Because to your point, 6 months from now, this process is probably totally different again. And so if I spent, let's say, 10 hours making this the most perfect, templatized, beautiful SOP in the world, and then 3 months later I have to change it, what that means is that I wasted 10 hours. And so at every stage of growth, the way that we combat overdevelopment of operations is by asking ourselves the question, like, what is the desired outcome of this thing? What do we actually need this SOP to do? Pretty much all we need this SOP to do is just exist so that if this person wins the lottery and leaves our company tomorrow, we know how to do their job. That's it. That's all we need. A sticky note that like you take a screenshot of and you upload it to like your monday.com SOP library does that. It actually is good enough, right? And so focusing instead on like, what is the right way of building this system as told to me by whatever coach, guru, whoever, versus what is the desired outcome of this system and what is the most efficient, minimum viable way that I can arrive at that outcome? Because the only thing that's guaranteed is that this is just going to change 10 more times. And I don't want to waste time perfecting something that's not perfect.
Absolutely. I love that because a lot of folks that are building this out and they're, in the early stages, they want SOPs from fear of loss,
Yeah.
not necessarily to achieve an objective.
Yeah. Yeah.
Right. So they're like, crap, I don't want to forget this or make a step or miss
Right.
something or like
Right.
if
Right.
somebody walks out on the back door on me, I know how to do something. Like so the initial engagement is on these systems are like, oh crap, I need to have some kind of insurance,
Sure.
right? And
Yep.
then they go into the world of, okay, I need better processes to take me somewhere else. Can
Exactly.
you speak to that and how
Yeah.
you see, businesses evolve and how they look at SOPs?
Yeah, totally. Like at that stage of growth, then let's upgrade the SOP. Let's get off of the sticky note, right? If at the beginning an SOP is literally just an insurance policy, jot it down, throw it in a library, you're insured, you're good to go. Update it in real time because it is going to change, but you're good. SOPs for a small company is kind of hilarious because everybody knows how to do their job. So no one's looking at the SOP anyway. Once SOPs become more usable is when you have a big enough team and complex enough processes that people need to be able to coordinate with each other. So likely the first place this pops up in a business is in onboarding, because onboarding needs to coordinate sales, onboarding, client success, fulfillment, product, right? All these people need to come together to make a client onboarding successful. An SOP is a fantastic system to do that because it's an objective, like third-party truth almost, that brings everybody together and coordinates action. That's an SOP worth building out. and worth not beautifying, but making functional. So for example, taking an onboarding SOP off of just like a long form Google Doc where you're just writing down all your steps and turning it into a task list in ClickUp so that every time a client gets onboarded, you duplicate the list, you assign out the tasks to the people like relevant to the SOP, and then you're able to actually track where is this thing being done? If ball gets dropped, where was it dropped, right? You have centralized information that coordinates activity across a team. That's what an SOP is actually for a grown-up business, right? When you're small, you don't actually need that because onboarding was just like you with a to-do list.
Absolutely. Can you speak a little bit to some of the creativity you have seen in some of the scenarios? Maybe let's talk about a beginner that is just starting out and trying to how to bridge, trying to figure out how to bridge between maybe sales and marketing in onboarding, right? Maybe and also talk to maybe an advanced business, if you don't mind,
Sure.
on how they evolve maybe with culture and leadership, right?
Okay. So we're talking about like client onboarding, the handoff between the front end and the back end of the business, for example.
Right. Just to
Cool.
give people some ideas of really how to create systems and SOPs that maximize innovation,
Mm,
creativity, and that buy-in that we talked about.
love it. Okay. So if you are super, super small, you are the front end and the back end of the business. So if you're super small, I wouldn't recommend like have a little just to-do list and that's your SOP,
It's like a
just
check.
so that you don't drop any balls and you don't forget any steps. As you have a team starting to come into that picture, now we have a process for our salesperson, for example, like an onboarding form that the salesperson needs to fill out every single time that grabs all the important information out of sales and sends it to the back end so that the client success team knows all the important information about this client and what they need to be successful. So that's the example of essentially replacing a human with a system, because before it was just you manually transferring the information from front to back. And now there's a form that does it for you. Cool. The form is centralized, organized. We know that we get the right information from every client every time. And client success has what they need so that they aren't bugging sales every day for the next week, trying to get clear on like, what is this client's payment plan? And what the heck did you promise this person? Right.
Yep.
So that's like mid-stage organization is now you have systems that are shuttling information around the company and keeping people coordinated and in alignment with each other. Where that gets to be creatively, let's use an example of like, how could somebody innovate on that system? Let's say your account manager notices that their clients get really excited when they notice it's the client's birthday and send them a gift. So now they have the salesperson or the client fill out their birthday on the onboarding form, and they create a system on the back end to automatically fire off an Amazon gift card 5 days in advance of their birthday. That's an account manager saying, how do I get better in my job of client success and client relationships? Well, I've got this amazing idea. Ops manager, can you figure out how to get me this info for every client that I work with? Ops manager turns it into a part of the onboarding form and the system improves. The client experience improves. But it's not because anything in the system needed to be optimized. It's because an individual on the team had an idea for how to make something better.
Yeah, because you gave them the autonomy to function in their world, and now you can keep them
Correct.
accountable in
Correct.
creativity comes out
Yeah.
rather than the mundane ClickUp tasks that just get thrown at them,
Right.
right?
Right.
So I love this conversation, Jonna. Can you help us also understand as we kind of close out,
Mhm.
some really good practices that agencies or even small business owners or anybody online entrepreneurs, whoever that's watching in, how to really get started? Like what's the step in just starting this journey of being process led or data led?
Okay. The starting journey is centralizing information from the beginning. Doesn't have to be beautiful, doesn't have to be clean. It just has to be there. And data is where this becomes really important. When let's say a 7-figure business owner is finally ready, they're like, all right, I get it. I need data. I'm ready for data. Give it to me. And we get in there and we're like, cool. So you have no data for the last 2 years. You just haven't been collecting it. all this stuff has happened. We have no idea what. I can't get you data. It would be a mess. It would be 12 months of me manually going back through with a fine-tooth comb, trying to track down what the heck happened just to figure out what happened. Stuff is going to happen anyway. All I'm saying is write it down. Like, that's it, right? Cool. How much did this person actually pay us? How long did they actually stay with us? What products did they actually use? When did they leave, right? Just making note of these things gives you a historical record so that when it comes time, because you don't need data when you're small, you are the data when you're small. Like, nobody needs to tell you what your client churn is. You know that 5 clients left last week because you had to offboard them, right? So when it actually gets to the extent that you have a team now running this and you need visibility and you need data, you actually have, even if it's a freaking mess, something to give your operations team and your data experts to say, hey, it's not beautiful, but can you clean this up? Yeah, we can clean it up. That's easy, but I can't go back through and find something that doesn't exist. And so my big invite to people is, even if you don't follow, again, so much of this is about just the minimum viable. You don't have to follow the perfect data system. You don't have to have beautiful spreadsheets. You just have to have a place where that information is going so that down the road when you need it, somebody else can go back through, clean it up for you, and present it into a way that it is viable and actionable and powerful for you.
I love that. And help us also understand in what capacity do you use something like high level or ClickUp, like from the tool standpoint, like help us kind of understand what is reasonable to use versus not. Because like maybe high level is not the best tool for SOPs, and I totally get that. I
Sure.
like ClickUp myself. Just
Me too.
even at high level, we use ClickUp, but
Mm-hmm.
help us understand how some of these systems kind of function from a tech standpoint.
Yep. So you essentially need 3 core categories of system as a digital business. You need your CRM, right? That's high level. That is what organizes your marketing and sales activity. Maybe it organizes some client communication activity, but your CRM is designed for like high communication volume in any areas of the business that need that. The second category is your project management system. I call this your single source of truth. This is ClickUp, Asana, Monday.com, Notion. People ask me all the time, is there a right system to use? No, they all work. Just pick one. Pick the one that works best for you. And how you use it is what's important. The single source of truth is the 80-20 of what your day-to-day execution and fulfillment team needs to do their job. It centralizes client information. It manages tasks and projects. It's meeting agendas, all the stuff that just needs to be managed and organized and centralized for your team to do their job all goes into a single source of truth. And then the third one is communication. So this is Slack, Teams, like Zoom would be thrown in there on top of that. But how are people talking, right? Because what I often see is that people are not really using their Asana, but their Slack is blowing up with tasks all day, every day. No. Task management goes in your project management system, your single source of truth. Real time execution, coordination, and clarification is what belongs in Slack. But most Slack channels that I see are like 40% busier and more chaotic than they need to be if you just had a working single source of truth.
I love everything you've shared today. And really just to kind of summarize, the meat of the conversation is really we talked about the hidden truths around SOPs in general that is really handcuffing world-class businesses. The 3 pillars that we shared is 1, marrying the class of systems with the right teams. Second is getting your teams to actually adopt what you're building. Third is creating systems and SOPs that can actually maximize innovation from the people that you have there so they can create accountability and you can build the business. I mean, the good book, I think it's called Good to Great, talks about having the right people in the right seats in the bus. Eventually they will help you find direction. You don't have to be the only driver of the business as an entrepreneur. Help us kind of close out this conversation. Any final thoughts that you may have around misunderstandings around processes and SOPs?
I think if I was to kind of distill, because we covered a lot of ground, if I was to distill our conversation down to a couple of core points, it would be build the minimum viable system for the outcome that you need at the stage of growth that you're in, and not more than that. Build your systems and then transfer ownership for those systems to the subject matter experts on your team, and through the lens of this can and should always get better. And then third, combine all of that with a world-class environment that invites and excites A players, so that if you get, to your point, the right people in the right seats with systems that work but can always be better and that are always doing the just good enough job, then you get the best talent moving as fast as possible with maximum innovation and creativity.
I love that, Jonna. Help us understand where we can find you and learn more about you, and maybe even work with you. Give us the plug of how we find you.
Yeah. So the best way to learn about us and what it is we do is on our website. That's spyglassops.com. And if this was helpful and you want more free ops value and ops coaching, I would direct you towards our Facebook group, where I do weekly live masterclasses on all things operations.
Awesome. Well, Jonna, thanks for jumping in. I know I reached out several times and we had a few weeks of planning around this and getting this
Yeah.
going. I'm so glad we did. If any of you are watching this video podcast and you don't even have a high level account, jump into a 30-day trial. We're pretty cool guys and gals here that are always working on cool projects. So we're happy to share from our mistakes. And we also have a Facebook community and group where a lot of agency owners, entrepreneurs, online digital entrepreneurs are all in, doing some of the cool things that are out there in the world. But Jonna, thanks for jumping in. Take care.
Absolutely. Thanks, Paulson.